An entire country weeps. Brazilians grieve the loss of someone who had given them hope. A race car driver, an idol, has died. Millions of people come to Sao Paulo to pay their respects to Ayrton Senna. The sport of auto racing has lost a champion.
It was just as emotional, unfortunately, I have to say, as all the others were.
The Formula One in the 1960s. It was mastered by one man, Jim Clark. To this day, the reserved Scot remains one of the best race car drivers of all time. He was born in 1936. He first took over his family's farm, but his talent quickly took him from being a hobby racer to a Formula One driver.
Jim Clark was very special. He was a country boy. He was a farmer, a sheep farmer. He didn't like all the hoo-ha surrounding. He was modest, and he's just remembered because he was such a fine gentleman, both off the track and on the track.
As if out of nowhere, Clark emerges onto the racing scene and is supported by a design engineer who builds particularly fast cars. His name? Colin Chapman. The success of the team begins already in 1963 with the celebration of their first World Championship. And that without any major sponsors or the normal karting career. His talent alone was enough to make a difference.
He drove in such an immaculate fashion that you never thought he would ever have an accident. He was the best racing driver to race against. He never cut you out. He never did the wrong thing. He was absolutely the etiquette of driving, the best.
Colin Chapman specializes in lightweight construction, which allows the race car to become faster and faster. The problem? The cars are not reliable.
I drove a Lotus, and I must admit that I had a number of technical problems, technical failure on it, for different kind of reasons, but the success of Jimmy was also due to the success of the Chapman at the time.
Chapman remains stubborn regarding his lightweight principle, and the victory with Clark justifies it.
I think Jimmy trusted Colin. They were a good combination. Jimmy was given all the best equipment, the best car, always the fastest. His teammates, just because Jim was such a good driver, his teammates hardly ever could compete with him.
In 1964, Jackie enters the world of Formula One. In his countrymen, he finds a role model and a friend. Together they share an apartment in London, which becomes referred to by their colleagues as the Scottish Embassy.
I learned a lot from Jim Clark. We were known as Batman and Robin, and there's no doubt who was Robin and who was Batman.
The British racing legend Jackie Stewart adopts the gentle driving style of his friend. His philosophy? Less is more, and more reliable.
Most people overdrive. Most people try too hard. Most people bully the car because they think they have to drive faster. They think they have to be more aggressive. While, on the other hand, you don't get aggressive. The car is a delicate piece of engineering.
Stewart is humble, like Clark, though he's already suffered much humiliation in his life. It will affect him his whole life. He was raised in Scotland with a disability that made him an outsider.
When I went to school, they were unquestionably the most unhappy times of my life because I'm a severe dyslexic. Even today, I can't do the alphabet. I don't know it. Never been able to learn it. I don't even know the words of my own national anthem or the Lord's Prayer. I can't remember them. I can't work an iPod or an iPad. I use the mobile phone to make phone calls. I can't even find telephone numbers on it because I can't find my name on a keyboard, for example. So I'm a severe dyslexic.
He didn't even know what the disease was called. For many years, Stewart hid his ailment, as the fear of being ridiculed was great. He knows this still very well from his childhood.
You're just addressed as being stupid, dumb, and thick. And that's what the teacher tells you. And you believe it, because everybody else can do the things so easily that you can't do. Writing, spelling, reading. There was nobody to help Jackie Stewart when he was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, up to I left school at 15. The moment I could get out, I was gone. A very bad time in my life.
His dyslexia is first diagnosed at the age of 41. But Stewart has another ability that sets him apart from the majority of drivers. His aptitude for concentration, precision, and focusing in on the moment. He first notices this in his youth while participating in a much different sport. Jackie Stewart begins clay pigeon shooting. He makes it to Great Britain's national championship.
And my shooting life changed my whole life because for the first time I was good at something.
Stewart combines the demands of both sports in a unique manner. This allows him to be superior to his competition. He wins races with his head rather than the gas pedal.
My shooting taught me a lot about racing. You know, it's a different sport, but shooting, you learn how to work your head, because if you shoot and you miss a target, the clay target, you never get it back. If I make a little error of judgment in a corner, I can make the time up, but in shooting, you never get it back. So I learned something called mind management. And most of my races I won in the first 5 laps because my head was cool, everybody else was uptight, I think, and I was able to do quite well.
Modesty and a clever driving style. His friend Jim Clark had inspired him. In 1965, Clark becomes a 2-time world champion. Clark and his team worked well together and were successful. The fans are at his feet. Nothing seems to be able to stop him. On top of that, he has a special power over women.
He was one of the cleverest guys I've ever met. He had a lot of girlfriends, and he was very shy, but the girls loved him. The great thing about Jim Clark, every single one of those girls thought they were the only one. It was wonderful.
But there are also setbacks, including a severe accident that leaves several dead. Clark takes a step back, but soon sets out on the attack with Lotus again. He wants also to show the USA how good he is. In 1965, he participates in the famous Indianapolis 500 and wins. Chapman and Clark dominate the scene. In 1967, hardly anyone believes that he will take a 3rd world championship. The new car is groundbreaking, but also unreliable. Win or break down. The two extremes create the first bouts of tension between the driver and the design engineer.
Colin Chapman,
I admired him on the one hand for his beautiful cars, but on the other hand, I also sometimes condemned him for the maneuvering of his cars at the limit, because he had a lot of drivers on his conscience, and that was at some point noticeable. That he was so brilliant on the one hand, but so nonchalant when it came to the life of his drivers. I made the decision, no matter what I drive, I'll never drive a Lotus.
Wenn du alles fährst, Lotus fährst du nie.
Jim Clark begins to question his future with Lotus. His loyalty to Chapman fades.
I think towards the very end of his career, he was beginning to realize the fragility of the Lotus in comparison to the BRM or the Ferrari or whatever else was around. And I think Jimmy by then was beginning to think, I need to go somewhere else. But that, of course, never happened.
Hockenheimring, April 7th, 1968. A cold and wet day. At the request of Chapman, Clark competes in a Formula 2 race. It doesn't count towards the World Championship, but the small team needs the entry fee. The route hasn't changed, but the cars have become much faster.
We were racing on the same racetracks with little or no protection, no runoff areas, no deformable structures, no barriers, nothing. Trees, we could be hitting anything.
These are the last pictures of Jim Clark.
It was in the 5th lap that something went wrong. Clark's car had not reappeared in front of the timekeeper.
At over 200 kilometers per hour, Jim Clark lost control of his car. He sped off into the forest virtually without braking. Help arrived too late. Clark died at the site of the crash. Today, a memorial lies on the side of the route in remembrance of the Brit. Deaths were not uncommon during this time, and the fate of Jim Clark showed that no one is safe in this sport.
We haven't seen another Jim Clark, but he was a very special man. When Jim Clark died, I think all of us thought, my God, if Jim Clark gets killed, we could all be killed. His accident, for me, for sure, was mechanical.
For Jackie Stewart, the memories of his friend are a crucial turning point in his life. He reevaluates things. Epic victories. The love of racing on one side. The dark side of the sport on the other. Personal tragedies always leave their mark on you, and he was strongly affected by what was close to him in life, like the death of Jimmy Clark.
When Jim Clark died, that was a wake-up call, I think, to us all, and it was then that I started my interest in motorsport safety.
The death of Jim Clark marks the beginning of a dark period.
Mike Spence died the same weekend, a month later. Ludovico Scarfiotti did the same. He died in the same weekend in June, and Joe Slesser died at the French Grand Prix in July. We had a series of fatalities, and safety was a disaster, and things had to change.
But it's not only the Formula One cars that are causing problems. The routes are no longer suitable for the ever faster cars. Whereas today there are wide gravel beds, at that time, strips of grass only a few meters wide serve as runoff areas. Trees, gravel, and bales of straw mark the finish line. Safety takes a back seat. Even medical care, in the event of an accident, is not a guarantee.
What changed Jackie Stewart's philosophy is definitely the fact that he had an accident in Francorchamps where he went off the track in a very high-speed corner, and I think he really felt like a survivor. He was extremely lucky.
I knocked a woodcutter's hut down. I did a huge amount of damage, and the car was written off, and I survived it, fortunately. But there was no medical help. There weren't any medical people there. There was no marshals there to help me. Graham Hill and Bob Bondurant took me out of the car, laid me in the back of a hay truck, and couldn't find an ambulance. It took them more than 45 minutes to have an ambulance come and take me away. Took me to a medical centre, it was called. I was put on the floor and there were cigarettes everywhere. I remember seeing the cigarettes, you know, used cigarettes. And that was the medical centre. And Jim Clark, Helen and Louis Stanley, who was running BRM at the time, they went with me to the hospital in the ambulance. We were led by a motorcycle escort. The motorcycle escort went away. The ambulance couldn't keep up and they lost the motorcycle escort. The ambulance driver did not know the way to the Liège hospital. It's a myriad of ridiculous inabilities. The system wasn't working.
The drivers begin to fight against the poor safety measures. Their union demands more and more improvements. At the head of the movement, Jackie Stewart. However, his safety campaign is not always met with support. Veterans of the sport view the danger aspect as the special appeal of the Formula One.
To go around a corner with no danger is like climbing a mountain with a safety net. To go around a corner when there is a danger makes it that much sharper, and but you can't really suggest things should be more dangerous. But I'm lucky I was racing when they were, and that made it more rewarding, I suppose.
Stirling Moss believes that it was better when it was dangerous because people were more responsible. He's absolutely correct, but you can't depend on everybody being responsible. You can't account for a racing car having a mechanical failure, like Jochen Rindt was almost certainly a mechanical failure. So you've got to make the racetrack capable of surviving an accident.
Nürburgring Castle. It stands symbolic of the growing criticism. It is the landmark of the world-famous North Loop, which first opened in 1927 and still today is not much different from the original course. The stretch in the middle of the Eifel is surrounded by woods. The difference in elevations throughout the 20-kilometer-long course means variable weather conditions. It's been many years since a Formula One race was held here. The ring does not comply with modern requirements. It's too old. The demands of the late 1960s, however, did not give reason to shut down the course. The drivers loved the challenge. However, the risks were too great. Jackie Stewart gave the course its famous nickname.
Green Hell is the greatest racetrack in the world, the biggest challenge in the world, but it was hideously dangerous, incorrect.
The drivers give a set of conditions to those in charge. That should increase the chance of survival in an accident. They're profound reformations that the ring cannot carry out. The dispute between the Drivers' Association and the organizers escalates in 1970. Jackie Stewart sets an example at the Nürburgring.
They wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't make one contribution. So I was the president of the Grand Prix Drivers Association at that time, and it was then very powerful. We stopped the Nürburgring.
Die waren nicht alle einverstanden.
We weren't all in agreement with what Jackie Stewart demanded. Basically, Jackie Stewart initiated what we have now, rather sterile routes. That was not his intention, but that was the result of it, of the effort to create a fairly safe environment for race car drivers. There were actually quite a few against it, who said he was overdoing it. The race organizers respond with pressure on the driver and teams. The conditions Jackie Stewart demanded cost a lot of money. It threatened big losses. Stewart must also work at convincing people within his association. Drivers such as Jackie Ickx are not at all enthusiastic about the plans. The likable Belgian would be a two-time Formula One world champion runner-up. He celebrates his debut in 1966 at the Nürburgring. Ickx calculates his success and the risks associated with it.
It was a calculated risk, and also that was the wish of everyone.
The debate on safety gets more and more intense. Ickx and Jackie Stewart stand on opposite sides, almost irreconcilably. The Brit also has to take sharp criticism. A conflict is unavoidable. There were some drivers who absolutely did not share his view. Among them were Jackie Ickx, who saw the whole thing a bit heroically and wanted to see it as such. That was the difference in character between the two.
Jackie Ickx, for example, wasn't keen on, he would not have boycotted a race if it hadn't been the rest of the drivers. If the rest of the drivers didn't go, there was no race. So no good of Jackie being on his own. But Jackie at that time was against the movement of safety, or at least how we were dealing with it.
Probably there have been a lot of misunderstanding on that subject. Clearly, I'm one of the great admirers of what he did.
But Jackie and one or two other drivers, very few, Jackie was the best known one who would object to the movement, if you like, to push for safety.
I didn't share the way he managed it. You know, to cancel a race 2 days before the Grand Prix, or these things, I was not made for it.
What would have been your way to reach it?
Reach it, tell an organizer 6 months or 9 months in advance, we have a number of problems with this race course, you have to change it. You do it, we come. You don't do it, we don't come.
It was a battle to get the other drivers to agree, because they had contracts and the teams would say, okay, if you don't have, I'll put another driver in your place. And the organisers were saying, well, if you don't want to race, that's fine with us, but don't come. There was all sorts of threats. But in fact, as a group, we stayed together. And we said, we're not going to the Nürburgring, because if we go to the Nürburgring with them saying we're doing nothing, we couldn't go to another racetrack and say, you must do this or that. Because they say, well, why should we do that when you're racing at the ring?
The association behind Stewart prevails, but the criticism surrounding the Nürburgring continues. The compromises that the driver and the organizer must consent to are not satisfactory to either party. In 1976, Niki Lauda has a severe crash on the course. The fate of the Nürburgring had already been sealed beforehand. At that time, the Nürburgring had a set of requirements from us drivers to improve the course over the next 3 years to make it more safe. 1976 was the last year of the 3. Only the cars were now so fast that we sat down together before the Nürburgring, and I said, to drive the Nürburgring today with these cars, that's pushing it. And then I had a bad accident. Not that that has anything to do with it directly, but that was the situation at the time. And the Nürburgring would anyway no longer be driven after the race, since the Nürburgring said themselves, there's nothing more that we can do to significantly improve the safety in the forest where the Nürburgring is. Therefore, it was already decided that that was the last year for the Nürburgring, and the race would then move to Hockenheim. The newspapers in Germany all wrote, Lauda killed the Nürburgring because of his accident. It wasn't true at all. I found it very unfortunate because I thought, when we have such a wonderful route, it should be the cars that are made to fit the routes, not the other way around.
Spa did the same thing. They thought they were bulletproof, but they wouldn't do anything, so we closed it. Now, that was while I was president of the Grand Prix Drivers Association. That was the only thing I could see that I could do, because we were having totally unnecessary deaths.
Unnecessary deaths. Colin Chapman dealt with the tragedies in the same manner as the majority of drivers at the time. Continue on. And Chapman had an up-and-coming top racer in his sights. Lotus discovers Jochen Rindt. The Austrian enjoys his pop star status in his hometown. Even in his early days with Cooper, his aspirations were clear: to become world champion.
Jochen was one of the best drivers in the world. He was a fantastic driver to race against, clean as can be, very good manners on the racetrack.
His switching to Lotus seems to be the right step. Colin Chapman made world champions, that he knew. However, the design engineer had only one priority.
Colin Chapman was brilliant at making it go fast, but almost fast under any circumstance.
In the paddock, it becomes clear Lotus wants to win at any cost.
Well, Jochen had the same opinion. He had to drive a Lotus because he wanted to win. It was the fastest car, but it was definitely a fragile car.
Wenn du Angst hast, brauchst nicht fahren.
If you're afraid, there's no need to drive. Or if you have the feeling that the car will be unsafe or is unsafe, you're not obliged to live as a guinea pig.
Als Versuchskanickel da auszuleben.
The majority don't take the risk. They prefer to live a normal life without any danger. Then there are the few who want to know exactly, how far can I go in my life, even with the risks. These are different kinds of people.
So, das sind schon andere Typen, sage ich jetzt einmal.
Accidents with fatal outcomes, almost a normality during those years. After Jim Clark dies, another 9 Grand Prix drivers die within 2 years. Death is a constant companion.
You know, at that time we were losing a lot of drivers. So I think racing drivers at that time were of a different species, almost, emotionally. It was a period of the sport that was hideous, and we still loved the sport.
On the tracks, the drivers simply block out the risks they're taking. Jackie Stewart and Rindt quickly become friends. The Austrian too wants more safety.
He had view on the future of Formula One, like Jackie Stewart did. They went on very well. They were close together, they lived together in Switzerland, not far away, and they had the same philosophy.
Jochen Rindt marries the Finnish model Nina. In 1968, they welcome their daughter Natasha to the world. On the other side, the ever-visible danger.
We all drove through the flames. The flames weren't out. The fuel was running across the racetrack. It was on fire, so we had to drive through it. And you see the car and, you know, it's a bad mess. And the wives have to support each other when that happens.
A woman who marries such a man or gets to know him, they know essentially what kind of person he is. Nonetheless, Nina has only one wish. and she knows it's the one her husband cannot fulfill. It would be asking too much.
Nina's statement about, "I'd like you to retire," is a very natural statement of somebody she loves.
Von so einem zu verlangen,
To ask such a person to go back to normal life without danger,
zurückzukehren, ohne Risiko, und zu Hause
and to sit
sitzen,
at home
Kinder
and
und
play with the children,
für die
and to
Frau,
abandon the job for the wife,
den Job aufzugeben.
for many people it's the right thing and
Viele
correct.
Menschen richtig und
But for
korrekt.
the extreme people in this
Aber
world,
für die Extremisten
incomprehensible.
auf dieser Welt unverständlich.
in 1970, Jochen Rindt's sporting career finally goes in the direction he had envisioned. Colin Chapman presents him with a new car. At the beginning of the season, however, there's first disillusionment. The new Lotus and Rindt. It's not love at first sight.
Jochen and Colin were having quite a fight at that time because Jochen wasn't pleased with the new car.
I'll race with the old car, the Lotus 49C, the one I drove in Monte Carlo, because the new car still has some issues where I'm not quite sure that I'll make it to the end. So instead I chose the safer car. After the Belgian Grand Prix in 1970, the bubble bursts. Finally, a victory. It's a title that he won't win again. And then comes Monza. September 5th, 1970. Saturday's final training session. It's 3:20 p.m. In the fifth round, Rindt suddenly loses control of the car at a speed of over 300 kilometers per hour. He has no chance. Jackie Stewart is there.
The human is an amazing animal, and I make no excuses that I was in tears before I got into the car. I went off and I did one flying lap and came back in. And there was no rage, there was no ridiculous bad feeling or, death wish or anything, nothing like that. When I drove the car, my mind was cold, and I did a very good lap. I was second on the grid. But when I got out the car, I was in tears again because I was amongst friends. She was fantastic. She behaved really well. She was very strong. She kept her emotions under control. Nina would have wanted to take the trophy, for Jochen. I don't think anyone else should have taken it. It certainly shouldn't have been Colin Chapman.
He deserved to receive the title of world champion. That was the way it had to be.
Motorsport, a high-risk sport that every driver has to adjust to. He must understand his car, for only he sits in the car. There are the different aids, the technology becomes more and more refined, but if man and machine don't understand one another, it doesn't work. That's how it was, and that's how it still is. Every round is always different. And you have to then adapt and also make note. Oh, for this curve I have to drive in such and such a way. Or I need this or the other car setting to be able to best drive the curve. And I have so many knobs and so many possibilities, and from that you can be at a great advantage. Jackie Stewart cannot read or write. However, he knows how to adjust the car like no other. Most of the time, it's only marginal adjustments. But the precision work of the engineers and the mechanics is also partly responsible for the success of the small Scot.
You make a car drivable. You don't want an enemy, you want a friend. You've got to be able to communicate with your engineers in those days, and even today, but also today with the help of telemetry and all the other things, electronic devices that exist.
I'm the only one driving the car, and sure, you have all the data and theory and so on, but I'm the only one who can definitively say what is truly the biggest problem that is hindering me from driving faster. And therefore, my assertions are also still very important to the team. For example, we have fast curves, and when I steer there, the car still drives straight, and it doesn't drive the curve like I want it to. And then I can tell that to the team, and they can adjust it over time, because maybe the slow curves are balanced well and the fast not. And that's something you can't necessarily adjust here with small tweaks. Rather, it's something the team in the factory must do, with larger car adjustments, structural adjustments, and then they can engineer it. The balancing act between high risk and more safety. How much danger belongs in the sport?
Ich will nicht das Gefährliche, ich will ja nicht, dass da was passiert, um Gottes Willen.
I don't want it to be too dangerous. On the other hand, this component of risk is what made the Formula One legendary.
Der Mythos auch, der Formel 1.
If everything is too safe and too matter-of-fact, then it doesn't have the same appeal.
Hat es nicht mehr den gleichen Reiz.
The death of Jochen Rindt in Monza. It only confirms that which has long haunted Jackie Stewart. Is it all worth it? I should continue to bury friends, comfort the wives. As a two-time world champion, the Scot begins to question the point of it all. In the spring of 1973, Stewart mentally bids farewell to his profession.
I decided in April of '73 that I was going to retire at the end of the season. I didn't tell anybody, I didn't tell my wife. My logic was that it would not be appropriate to tell Helen I was going to retire because so many people had died, close friends. Her logic would have said, well, if you're going to retire, you retire now. Why are you going to continue? Because it was only April that I made a decision. I didn't want her to be thinking of the 10 green bottles sitting on the wall. You know, one falls, the next one falls, waiting for 10 to fall, if you like.
Team manager Ken Tyrrell is one of the few who know of Stewart's decision. He has only one request of his departing champion. The superstar is to teach everything to his colleague François Sévère. Stewart is to make a world champion out of the talented protégé. The farewell tour in 1973 coincides with the journey to a third world championship. With his Tyrrell, the fight for the title is decided early on. There, his departure from his sport already lies heavy on his mind. His last race of the season in the USA, his 100th Grand Prix. Jackie Stewart wants to give the win to his colleague Sévère and afterwards retire. However, things happen differently.
Jochen was one thing, but François Sévère, the day before was going to be my last race, died at Watkins Glen, got killed there. So therefore it wasn't as happy an ending as it could have been. It was obviously a tragic ending. I only told her, sadly, on the afternoon that François died, that I was no longer a racing driver. And I didn't do the Grand Prix the next day, not because of fear or not because of anything other than in respect to François. I thought it wouldn't have been correct for the team to race, and it was much better to stop. So my 99 is almost better than 100 anyway.
With his 3 titles, Jackie Stewart goes down in motorsport history. The British racing legend leaves behind more than just a few titles. Against all odds, he has revolutionized the sport. It still remains dangerous after the Stewart era, but his efforts towards more safety have significantly influenced the Formula One.
Jackie Stewart did the start of changing the face of motor racing. Jackie Stewart definitely was the leader on that aspect. He made a lot of personal effort into it. And if safety is as safe as it is today, definitely they played a key role into it.
But there are also drivers who, with their hard style, search out that risk, such as the Canadian Gilles Villeneuve at the beginning of the 80s. Jochen, there's one last thing I'd like to talk about. Gilles Villeneuve.
Ja.
Gilles, he was really a good friend. He was a fantastic person.
He was fast and furious.
Gilles Villeneuve begins his career in his hometown. Here, he already evokes enthusiasm among the spectators with his wild driving style. Fearless and spectacular, not only in the race car.
He was like this in his life, you know, in the normal life. He was unbelievable with the cars, with the boat, with the helicopter.
He came there and performed tricks with his helicopter, with his large Augusta. It couldn't go on like that without consequences. Villeneuve was born in 1950 in Quebec, the French-speaking part of Canada. After first racing snowmobiles, he came to Formula racing.
Villeneuve is off in 1. He is off in 1. The ambulance is out on the track. I have no other information at the moment.
Again and again, he's involved in accidents. Some, it's a miracle he survives. When Ferrari brings the Canadian to the Premier class, Villeneuve draws his own unique conclusions from his experiences.
One day he told me, you know, Alain, in Formula One you cannot hurt yourself. Because in fact he had some unbelievable accident. He never hurt himself. And in the first season myself, second race, I had a scaphoid, you know, and I felt pain, you know. And as soon as you start to feel the pain somewhere, you realize that you can hurt yourself. You can be hurt, you know. We have seen a lot of accidents, but he thought himself that that could not happen.
At Ferrari, Villeneuve is still a legend today. Followers of the Scuderia worship him. He fits on the team. His driving style is full of passion for auto racing. The spectators love him.
A lot of really top-line journalists would say to you, who was the most exciting driver that there's ever been in Formula One? Gilles Villeneuve. But in fact, he didn't win that much. He was exciting to watch, spectacular. The grandstands loved him, the spectators loved him. The bank manager, not so much.
For Villeneuve, the only race that counts is the race he's currently racing. He's simply not made for the tactics that go along with the world champion title. He'd rather fall out in an attempt to win than to cross the finish line second.
And to finish first you must finish.
Wheel to wheel, relentless fighting, impressive drifts. Villeneuve encompasses all that the fans want from a driver. Never give up, even when you only have 3 wheels left, as happened to him in Holland in 1979.
I wanted to drive it round to the pits. Maybe we could get it fixed. It was only 3 wheels on the car. But Gilles was still thinking, I'll get back to the pits. Maybe we can get it fixed. So he drove from the heart, not from the head.
I liked him a lot because he was such a wild animal on the one side, but also very controlled and a free thinker in how he lived and how he came to races with his huge camper. We were also actually very good friends then, down in Monaco. Villeneuve and I, our families, wives and kids. In 1981, Villeneuve has competition from within his own team. Didier Pironi challenges him with enormous tasks that the Canadian often fails. Villeneuve became more and more dogged because Pironi was faster than him. So he started taking risks that were unforgivable. In Imola, it comes to the breaking point. Pironi overtakes Villeneuve at the end of the race. Beforehand, it had been agreed upon to in no way endanger a Ferrari victory.
He was so upset by what happened in Imola, the race before, with Didier Pironi and with the management of the Ferrari team, that without this story in Imola, I don't think he would have taken the risk he has taken in qualifying in Zolder.
Zolder. The Belgian Grand Prix 1982. Training ends in tragedy. Involved, the German Jochen Mass. I saw him coming behind me in the rear-view mirror. I was in my cool-down lap. We had only one round with these qualifiers. They lasted for one round, no longer. And my round was over, and I already had holes in my tires. And so I drove already with caution. I drove then over this small crest, look in the rear-view mirror, and see a Ferrari approaching. I was in the middle and drove to the right, not lighting quick, rather shifted over to the right, so that the left lane would be free, and then it was indeed free. But he didn't know that exactly, and wanted to pass me on the right. And so, of course, he hit my car and flipped over the wheels. It was a light touch, it wasn't a crash of any form. He was catapulted by the tires, and then he flew out to the right. Then it ripped him out of the car as it landed back on its nose. It ripped him right along with the entire aluminum back plate with the seat. I stopped, of course, and ran over and looked at him wide-eyed. That was a terrible feeling, to be involved in the death of a friend. And a small sense of guilt still always creeps up. Should I have given him a sign? Should I have gone earlier? Should I have done this or that? The events in Zolder haven't escaped Jochen Mass. Even more than 30 years later, he sometimes thinks back to that 8th of May. A day that also permanently affected his life. There are things where looking back on it is part of it. For a long time? It affects me still today. It's the unpleasant side of the racing sport when you're involved in such things. You have to see how you come to terms with it. Of course, you're not only feeling bad on that day or the day after or the next week or the next year. It's something that's imprinted on your mind forever. The death of Gilles Villeneuve. It will always be associated with the name Jochen Mass. May 1994, Brazil. 12 years after the death of the last Grand Prix racer Riccardo Paletti, the country bids farewell to their national hero. Ayrton Senna crashes in Imola, and the call for more safety is unmistakable. How long do we still have to watch how they die? Let us prove our love for Senna. More safety for the race driver. God doesn't want them to die. Today it was Senna. Who will it be tomorrow? let us take immediate action. For Jackie Stewart, the funeral service is an almost forgotten experience. It should be his last funeral, the last coffin carried of one of his racer friends. With the death of Ayrton Senna and the criticism of the Formula One that followed, from all over the world, radical changes came in effect. Finally.
It wasn't until Ayrton died that the real work was to start on revolutionizing safety with Professor Watkins. And then, because of the position he had been given, he had the power to get to the Max Mosleys and the Bernie Ecclestons to categorically change the sport. And from that point on, the sport has become an example for the rest of the world. Nowadays, I feel that, I'm glad that the normal circumstances would never allow a driver or a group of drivers to go through the same experiences that we did. But when you have to deal with the funeral or the aftermath of the accident with the girlfriend, the wife, the father or the mother at the track, then you have to go to the funeral, to their home after the burial or the cremation. And then, that's a whole different experience. And I'm pleased that the drivers of today have had no experience of that.
Jackie Stewart and his wife once counted how many close friends they had lost to motorsport. It was 57.